Hey, welcome back to another video. Today is about the recorder module of Bitwig Studio. It's a grid module. It's fairly simple module. It's easy to explain, but there's a lot of stuff you can do, and I want to show you some examples, of course, and some inspirations you can do for yourself with the video or maybe after the video. So let's dive into Bitwig Studio and I'll show you how this works. So we have here an audio track. There's an instrument track here. I can delete, it's not important. So we have here just a normal funky soul break. So super simple drum loop. And this is what I want to use to explain how the recorder works. So what we need now is an FX grid module. And you can use the recorder module, of course, also inside the polygrid, which is the instrument version of the grid. This is the audio FX version of the grid. It works exactly the same as the polygrid. The only difference is that you have here a mix knob and you have a pre-FX and a post-FX, and it's wired up as an audio FX audio effect device where you have an audio input here and audio output, and you can hook up modules in between to alter a signal, and you can also use the mix knob here to bring in the tri signal and mix it in with your effect signal. And besides that, it's the same thing. Okay, so how do we start? We start with the recorder module here, bringing this in. So this is how the recorder module looks like. We have an audio input, we have an audio output, simple. We have a trigger for the recording, and we have a trigger input for the playback. So you can record something and you can play back audio. Simple. So now we open up here the help menu, and it says we have record control, like I said. Note this is input is this input is mono. Okay. So we have a signal input, and play control sets whether the playback is occurring, sets whether recording is occurring. Okay, so we can record something with trigger signals or with gate signals. And it's also saying your recorder and delay. It's basically just a temporary delay buffer. So every time you record something and you save it as a preset and reload the preset, it's gone. It's just for the moment, and it doesn't survive reloads or project saving. So it's a simple device. Okay, it's just an in-memory recording buffer basically. So what we do now is let's play back actually here what it does. So the audio goes in, the audio goes out, so we hear something. So now we go into the recorder module and we go out of the recorder module. When we play back now, there's nothing because the recorder module is actually doing nothing. It's just staying there and being lazy. And what we use now is a button module here, and we call this playback. And we hook this up here with the play input, and also we use a button here for the recording. We call this recording. And now we start playback here, and then we can record something. So we hit just record. And when I disable this, it stops recording. So only when the trigger signal or the input signal of this gate input here is high or has a value of 1, this one is recording until the signal is back to 0 again. Also the same for the playback, it's the same. So when we play back here, it plays, and when we disable this button, it stops exactly at this position. There's sadly no way to continue to playback from this position on here. When you hit playback here again, it starts from the beginning. Also for the recording, if you hit stop and record again, it starts from the beginning again. So there's also no possibility to change the offset of this playback or recording head, and there's also no way of changing the playback speed or recording speed or whatsoever. It's a fairly simple device, like I said in the beginning. So okay, now we bring in here the original tri signal. You can see it's completely messed up, so there's no sync at all. And the reason for that is we started recording and playback somewhere on the grid, somewhere in between the drum loops, so there's no synchronization at all happening. And I initially thought maybe I give you some ideas with the clock quantizer and so on, but it gets too complicated at first. I maybe show you this later. So we switch out here the playback and the recording for gate modules, which is easier to do in the beginning. Maybe do this here to the side, put this down. So now we can use 2 gate modules here to trigger recording in a kind of beat grid way, right? It's synchronized to the project tempo, and you can also switch here some gates off and on if you want, and you can repeat it in a different way. So now we switch here to gate mode, and we maybe record from the second snare drum on until the end of the breakbeat. So you can see we basically want to start recording here, and we want to record everything until the end from here. So we want to leave this out. Okay, so we want to have the snare drum at the 1 because we want to re-trigger the snare drum all the time. So I do this here by just leaving these 2 gate slots free. Start with the snare here and switch this to gates mode. And gates mode is basically, there's actually important difference. So when we go here to the oscilloscope, switch to slow, you can see the first part here is basically the low state, and then we switch to the high state and we stay on the high state until we are back here at the first empty slot, right? When I switch this to the triggering mode, it's quite different, right? For each slot here, we get a different high and low state, and we get a single empty slot or single no trigger area here from these 2, right? So this is a basically important part. So when we switch this here to gates, we make this whole section here just one big single trigger, and this is exactly what we want for the recording. We want to have recording here from the snare drum up until the end, and then we want to switch the low state and stop recording. So you can see here the red part or the red dot is actually recording exactly in time over and over again. So now we can switch here to the playback triggers, and we have this here on triggers. We have a single we have multiple triggers for all these slots. I'll put this down here. So what we do basically is we start by sampling the snare, everything until here, and then we play back this part here over and over again. So let's basically just do this, right? This is what we do. And this is also how it sounds. So let's do it. And when we bring in here the original tri-signal, we can mix these 2 sound sources together. And now we can, of course, here just disable all these and just bring in some ghost notes. So now you can create nice little devices which fill in gaps of your drum loop. You can also use here the post FX maybe with some filtering if you want. So maybe use a filter here. So just some rough ideas for creating interesting drum bits. You can also change here the step count, maybe to 16, and get some glitchy flavors in here. Or maybe you can also go back here to 8, switch this to gate, and just play back the whole section here at from this different position, basically. Let's try this. So we now have the problem here that the playback stops at this position, and it shouldn't stop there. And the problem is that the recording here basically is not done when this yellow dot is at this position. So it stops playback here because the recording is not done. So what we have to do is we have to cut here the recording after some point. So maybe we use the select here, go to this, and use a button, call it recording. Now you can see it plays back basically the whole last part here, and now recording is basically done one time, and then it stops recording at all. So you have to play around with a lot of logic, right, to bring in when do you want to record, how to start recording, how to stop recording, when do you start the playback, and also you have to be aware of all the interferences when you recording. Sometimes the recording is not done, the playback also stops, and so on. So there's a lot of things going on with the recorder you have to be aware of. And like you see here, with a lot of logic around the recording module, you can make this work and you can make interesting effects with it. So now that we have all this stuff, this logic in place, and we know how the recorder kind of works, we can go completely nuts with all the logic around it and trigger it when we want it and how we want it. So for instance, like I said in the beginning with the playback and the recording button, maybe I show you this now. Maybe just we delete this here again. So we have a recording, we have a playback, and we want to start the recording exactly at the beat event or grid event. So we need a clock quantize, and we also need a trigger signal. So we go for triggers here, and this is our clock basically, which decides how much we want to divide our beat grid and when do we want to trigger something on here. And we can also use the clock quantize down here. We use also the clock signal down here. We use this for the recording. So now we have a different problem. So I'm going here for the oscilloscope to show you this. Switch this to slow. Switch this to slow. Yeah, okay. Make this a bit longer so we can see what's going on. So here we have the delayed signal, which is the synchronized signal, which is synchronized to this trigger clock here. And we have our initial button press or our initial event. So when we press this here, as you can see at the top, it's delayed, as you can see in here. And it's delayed because of the trigger signal of our clock quantize, right? It delays the signal until the beat grid is at the right position, and then it starts to pass on the event or the trigger signal. So the problem here, as you can see, it switches back to the 0 state at some point without us switching back to 0. We still want to record here, right? But it switches back to 0. And that's because of the trigger module. The trigger signal sends out a high and a low state all the time, which is basically the clock signal. As you can see, it's on, off, on, off. And this clock quantizer uses this as a guide as to when to pass on a certain event. So when we trigger this one here, it waits until something happens and then it switches on, as you can see here, and then it switches off here again. So this is something we don't want to have because we want to still hold the value at 1 until we release the button press here, right? So we have to introduce a lot of more logic to make this happen. And we can do this by using a latch module, for instance. So what we do now is maybe cut this all off here so it doesn't look so complicated. So what we want to do is we want to press this button. Then we want to delay this button press until it's quantized to the grid. Then we want to switch to the high state, which is 1. Okay, we pass this on here. And then we want to stay on the high state, which this is exactly what the latch module does. It stays on 1 all the time until it gets a different information. And we want to switch to 0 again when we press or when we release the record button, right? And we do this by using a not logic module and go to 0. So what this does is basically when we release this or send out a 0 signal, 0 becomes here a 1, and this one sends out a 1 to 0. Okay, so now we have this we have this quantized signal here, which is something we did before. So we press here, then it got delayed, as you can see here. Then it switches off, but it stays on because the latch module doesn't get a different information. Now we switch this off, this one becomes 1, and this latch then switches to 0. Okay. So now we have basically exactly what we want. We want to delay our initial trigger until it's synchronized to the grid, and then we want to stay at the high state as long as possible until we release the button here, and then we switch back to 0. The problem is that the release of this button press is also off the grid, so we can also clock quantize this if we want. So we can do this. So now we have both the initial trigger and the release synchronized to the grid. So let's try this. It's delayed. So now we have high state. This one stays high because of the latch. This one goes back to 0 here because of the clock quantizer. That's not what we want. What we want to stay exactly at high. Then we switch off. It got delayed because of the clock quantizer, and it's exactly releasing on the grid. Okay, so this is basically a bit of logic you have to do, but this is the signal exactly we want to trigger the recording and to release the recording. Okay, so we clock quantizing the initial trigger and the release. Okay, so let's try this. So it's recording, release, and it records until the beat grid says so. And let's play back this. Record, release, and done. Oh, we have to use this, of course. Yeah, and maybe we can use here an gate repeat. Gate repeat. Go trigger mode. Make this shorter. Maybe go here too. Maybe That's maybe something we can use. So now we have a gate repeat here, which is completely off the grid, but it also sounds interesting. It's a kind of a glitch effect, right? So maybe we use here an ADS AD and we modulate this. Let's try it out. And we trigger this. We trigger this maybe with the gates module. Maybe here and here. I don't know. Okay, so you can kind of create these nice little glitch effects with this. If you think this triggering is too often here, then maybe we can use a scaler and slow down here the phase signal, which is the cause of our speed. Phase in, then slow this down, maybe to this. Let's try it out. That's better. Okay, so now we have this effect, which sounds kind of nice. Maybe we stop this with the playback. So we go for a transport playing and the select here. And switch this only on when the playback is playing. So now we have a glitch effect, okay? Glitch. Maybe duplicate this. So we have two of these devices now. And the first one here, we modify this to maybe just a regular ghost node creator. Oh, maybe we also delay this here a bit. I switch this off and go for gates. Maybe we also use this one time. Select. Okay, maybe use a merge here for different rhythms. And then we switch between these two states here at random with the dice. Or with the dice. And we trigger this. Maybe we switch this here to a probabilities thing. So we don't want to trigger this every time, we would just want it to have this sometimes. And this is basically how you can spice up your drum loops with the FX grid and the recorder. There's a lot of stuff you can do with this. There's also not only things for drum loops. You can also use this for reverbs and I don't know, just repeat certain patterns and maybe use different playback speeds. Maybe you can do here another one. FX grid. Use the recorder. Hook this in here. And then maybe just also go with the button first. I always like to start simple and then make it complex over time so you don't lose track what you actually want to do. So yeah, maybe we use here an gate repeat. And the gate repeat here. Maybe some kind of buffer effect. Maybe a dice. Maybe a modulator. Trigger. Or you can also bring here maybe a filter. SVF. Yeah, maybe you can also use your second dice. So now we have switched between the different filter positions, right? Pretty harshly. But you can also maybe use a lag. So if we watch this here on the oscilloscope, So we get from the dice signal, from the dice module, we get random values out. But with the lag module, we can kind of get some transitions between this. Maybe try out the average module. Yeah, we get some rounded edges here. So now, basically, we have a nice transition between the filter frequencies here. Maybe use a reverb on the input. Optimize here a bit the filter, the recording and the playback. I have to interrupt this video at this point because I forgot that I actually was recording a tutorial, and I was completely lost. I played around with all the modules for another hour or so, but I want to just give for this video a rough idea about the recording module and what kind of logic modules you need around the recording module to make it work or to make it kind of interesting. In this example, it was just a drum loop to make it more fancy. And you can, of course, use it for pad sounds, lead sounds, bass sounds, whatever. Bring in some artifacts, record and loop back at different positions in time. It's interesting, it's fun, and you can learn a lot. So leave a like if you liked the video. Hit me up with some questions in the comments if you want to, and yeah, I hope to see you soon, maybe this week with the live stream on this channel. So make sure you subscribe and also activate this shitty small notification bell. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.